The tracks of the first armored vehicle slid on the red dirt slope. Headlights swept across sweat-drenched faces. More than 300 poor people stood blocking the road, barefaced, empty-handed, standing right in front of the gun barrels of the Search Bloc. "Get out of the way, or we'll shoot," the officer shouted through the loudspeaker. No one moved, not a single step back. On the low wall, children climbed up as if looking for a spot to watch a soccer final. Miguel, Andrés' son, raised his fist to the sky, shouting, "Pablo! Pablo!" as if calling the name of a star player. The chant echoed down the slope, slamming into the riot shields. Captain Rojas stood behind the line of shields, eyes fixed on the crowd, women clutching children to their chests, men gripping their sandal straps tightly, faces that the Constitution required him to protect, now standing between him and the country's most wanted man. Rojas knew that any bullet fired tonight would pierce the chests of the very people the state had abandoned. The world thought Pablo Escobar bought Medellín with cocaine. They were wrong. He bought it with bricks, corrugated roofing, and house keys handed out like candy. And that night, he came to collect the debt. What no one outside this hill knew, what history books never tell, is that Pablo Escobar had built this moment years earlier. And what he did in those years didn't just lift an entire slum out of the garbage dump. It rewrote how one man could make an entire city stand between him and the government's gun barrels. In the early 1980s, Colombia lived with the sound of explosions. Morning newspapers printed pictures of burned cars. Evening newspapers printed pictures of coffins. Flowers placed on the street hadn't even wilted before sirens wailed again. In Washington, the words cocaine and Pablo Escobar sat on the president's desk. In Bogotá, the word extradition sat on the attorney general's desk. In Medellín, most of the poor people on the hills only caught fragments on the radio between two crackling bolero songs. They couldn't pronounce extradición. They only knew that every time that strange-sounding word appeared on the news, more police jeeps drove through their neighborhood, and another mother screamed in a hospital corridor. The Medellín cartel had by then swollen into a machine. Planes took off from small dirt strips in Antioquia and landed in Florida. Loads lifted at night, money in dollars by morning, stuffed into suitcases. Those piles of cash went into banks, into real estate, into officials' briefcases. Very little trickled down the slopes where children slept next to open sewers. Pablo Escobar sat at the top of that machine, one hand on the phone, the other flipping through newspapers. His name in bold on the crime pages, then the international pages, the U.S. posted rewards. The next week, Mexico handed over a trafficker, and papers called it a signal. The Colombian government nodded, signed more papers with Washington. The word extradition grew thicker every day. Guns and bombs grew thicker every day. A judge shot in front of his house. A presidential candidate collapsed on the podium. A security headquarters blown sky high. Every shot, every explosion pulled a string straight to Pablo's desk, both power and a noose tightening around his neck. In Medellín, not everywhere felt the weight of those strings. Downtown, people still drank coffee, adjusted ties, went to offices. At night, from bars with colored lights, the valley looked up at the hills and saw dark patches spreading downward. No streetlights, no concrete foundations. Those dark patches were where the state only remembered to send police when it wanted to clean the area. They were garbage dumps. Houses made of old planks, dented tin, plastic tarps, slippery dirt stairs where kids played soccer with deflated balls, coughing themselves hoarse from garbage smoke. On paper, those areas still belonged to Medellín. On politicians' maps, they were just gray smudges. On the map in Pablo's head, they were blank spaces, the only places no one had bought yet. One afternoon, the TV screen in the Escobar living room flickered from weak signal. The image showed a downtown street deformed after a car bomb. Shattered glass, smoke, people running in panic. The camera panned over rubble, over a burned taxi, then stopped at the edge of the street where a row of makeshift wooden houses had collapsed like a matchbox. An old woman stood in front of the empty lot, torn floral dress, gray hair matted with dust, still clutching an old key. The reporter shoved the microphone close. "What do you need, ma'am?" She looked straight into the lens. "The state only shows up after the house burns down." Those words reached the Escobar living room as clearly as if someone had spoken them right there. Not a narrator's voice, not a politician's voice. The voice of someone who had just lost everything and still expected nothing more. The cigarette in Pablo's hand burned down to the filter. He didn't stub it out. His eyes stayed on the old woman's face on the screen. The state only shows up after the house burns down. Then who shows up before the house burns? Who builds the new house? Who gets thanked every time it rains and the roof doesn't leak? The Medellín cartel's money at that point was enough to buy more guns, more bombs, more judges. But every gun, every bomb only added another signature to extradition agreements. The one thing missing that wasn't in the safe. A group of people willing to stand in front of gun barrels for him. That group wasn't in Congress. They were wading through mud on the hillsides, hauling water, pulling garbage carts. If the state abandons them, I will be their state. The thought didn't ring out as a full sentence in Pablo's mind. It sat among the numbers, the cost of a basic brick house on a hill, the cost of a local election, the cost of a human shield in front of an armored vehicle. The first neighborhoods appeared like fresh ink stains on the city's skin. Still Medellín, but now with a cluster of straight brick houses on a hillside that yesterday had been makeshift shacks. A modest sign, Medellín sin tugrias Medellín without slums. A name that sounded more like a congressional slogan than a drug lord's project. The families chosen to move in were people who had never received anything except bills. The day they moved, neighbors watched like it was a wedding. Calloused hands touched new walls. Kids ran in circles, laughing like mad when they discovered a real indoor toilet instead of a pit out back. In the afternoon, a jeep appeared on the dirt road. Bodyguards on both sides. Pablo stepped out. White shirt, slight belly showing under the belt, mustache neatly trimmed. He didn't need to say much. One father stepped forward, trembling, holding his child, unable to find words, just repeating gracias, Don Pablo. An old woman took his hand, kissed the back of it, tears falling on his leather shoes. Local TV cameras recorded everything. That night, the images aired on the news. Same city, same man's name. In the morning, that name tied to an assassination. In the evening, that name tied to a slum turned into brick homes. The next day, police went up another hill to search for a small-time dealer. This time, they didn't just meet barking dogs and locked doors. They met a group of women blocking the alley entrance, hands on hips, cursing with purpose. "Don't touch Don Pablo's people," a young officer reported back, adding at the end, "Sector X now follows Escobar." That report landed on Pablo's desk a few days later, clipped to an estimate for building 50 more houses. You can buy a bullet for a few pesos, buy a judge's silence for a few tens of thousands of dollars, buy a hillside silence with 50 houses, each house one family. Each family one reason to stand on the wrong side when the armored vehicles arrive. Pablo set the report down and looked out the window. Below, Medellín stretched out, lights flickering, the dark patches on the hillsides still unlit, many places still blank, many places still waiting for the state to show up after the house burns. Pablo didn't start building houses to atone. Not because one night he heard crying in his dreams and saw blood on his hands. He started because he understood a very simple equation. A car bomb explodes once. The news lasts a week. A grateful hillside stands still for one night, and that image lives for a generation. In a war against a state with an army and a constitution, guns and explosives are just noise. The real weapon is the people holding house keys, looking up from the dirt slope and deciding which side to stand on when the armored vehicle stops. Escobar's finca sat on a different hillside, far enough from Medellín to escape the sound of car horns, but close enough to see the city lights every night. That day, the long dining table in the living room held no food, only ashtrays full of cigar butts, half-empty whiskey glasses, maps spread across the surface, and a messy pile of printed documents. Gustavo leaned back in his chair, shirt unbuttoned at the top 2 buttons, eyes fixed on the freshly cut fax roll. The Ochoa brothers sat across from him, suits neater, but their gazes just as heavy as the drinks in front of them. Escobar's lawyer flipped back and forth through pages of extradition law. A younger man, hair slicked back, tie knotted tight, sat near the end of the table. He didn't belong to the coca world. He belonged to the world of speeches. Political advisor. Pablo paced behind his own chair, like a small leopard in a cage too narrow. The conversation began with numbers. How many tons had gone through Florida last month? How much cash was sitting in the Panama banking system? How many officers had been bought? How many judges were not flexible? The lawyer pointed to a bolded section. The extradition treaty allowed the U.S. to request the surrender of Colombian citizens with sufficient evidence. Sufficient by their definition, Gustavo added, voice dry. The older Ochoa shrugged. They can write the evidence themselves. The question is how far they dare to go. The political advisor cleared his throat, asked for the floor. That's what I wanted to say, he began, voice smooth as a radio ad. The Americans have something you don't. A beautiful story they tell about themselves. You have something they don't. A story to tell the poor. If you want to stop this extradition game, you need more than bombs. You need seats in Congress. You need votes. Pablo stopped pacing, leaned his hands on the back of his chair. Votes? You build houses, the advisor continued, as if rehearsed. You give people homes, water, soccer fields. You become the champion of the poor. You run for office, win 1 seat, 2 seats, 3 seats. You stand up in Congress and say extradition is treason, selling Colombians to the Americans. The poor will applaud. The press will have to listen. The world will have to call you congressman before they call you anything else. The Ochoa brothers nodded slowly. The idea was clean. Houses, votes, microphones, no blood. It sounded very different from explosions and gunfire. Gustavo did not nod. Votes don't stop a U.S. arrest warrant, he said, straight to the point. A congressional seat doesn't stop a Search Bloc bullet. You can campaign with the housewives in Bogota, but when the gringos decide to drag you onto a plane, no ballot will stand in the doorway. The advisor shrugged. Not votes alone. Image. You appearing on TV not as a monster, but as a philanthropist, when they have to explain to the world that they're extraditing a man who builds houses for the poor, it becomes a lot harder to say. Gustavo lifted his glass, drained it, set it down hard. They bombed Vietnam in front of the whole world and didn't blush. You think they'll feel embarrassed cuffing a drug trafficker? Don't be naive. The 2 men from 2 different worlds stared at each other across the paper-covered table. One spoke the language of votes and television. The other spoke the language of bodies and extradition. Pablo listened, said nothing. He poured more whiskey, didn't drink, just swirled the glass in his hand. The door opened. A subordinate came in, shirt soaked with sweat, eyes still bright with excitement. He apologized for interrupting, placed an envelope on the table. From the new barrio on San Cristobal Hill, he said. The one where we just fixed up dozens of houses. Gustavo tore open the envelope, pulled out a handwritten report and a photograph. The picture, taken with a cheap camera, was slightly blurry, but clear enough. A group of women standing at the head of a dirt alley, pointing at a police officer's face. Behind them, the row of newly built brick houses with square windows. Caption underneath. Vecinas defienden su barrio. Neighbors defend their neighborhood. The report told the story. That morning, a police team went up the hill to arrest a small-time dealer tied to a rival cartel. Before they could get far, residents blocked them. Not drunk men. Women, holding babies, one hand on a broom, the other on stones. They didn't curse the way people curse police in general. They cursed by name. "Don't touch Don Pablo's people." One officer took a rock to the face. The unit had to withdraw. The subordinate added the final line. The women said, "If the government wants into that neighborhood, they have to ask you first." The room went silent. Not the polite silence that waits for someone else to speak, but the silence when someone strikes an unexpected note, and everyone listens to the echo. The political advisor looked at the photo, eyes lighting up. "See?" He turned to Pablo. "This is votes. This is the crowd. This is—" Gustavo cut him off. "This isn't votes," he said quietly. "This is ammunition." Pablo picked up the photo. The women looked toward the lens, mouths still open, very likely in the moment of shouting his name. Behind them were the new houses, brick walls, tin roofs, small front porches. Farther back, gray sky. No politician in sight, no party flags, just people who owed a debt and were ready to throw stones at anyone who dared enter their area. A vote lies quietly in a ballot box. A human body stands in front of an armored vehicle. Two different values. "You guys see houses as bricks," Pablo said, eyes still on the photo. "I see houses as something else." He set the photo down, finger tapping the blurry face of one woman. "When they come with arrest warrants, armored vehicles, cameras, they have to go through these people first. Not through me." The words came out like a verdict. The political advisor opened his mouth, then closed it. He had just spoken of votes, of speeches. Gustavo had just recognized what he had been looking for. A living shield, not on paper, but of flesh and blood. Pablo swirled the whiskey in his glass, looked out the window. San Cristobal Hill was just one dark patch among countless others. "San Cristobal was only the test," he said. "Now we know the result. We just need more hills, more houses, more people holding keys." The plan was drawn on the map, among red circles marking high points around the city. Hills that overlooked highways, main routes, the paths police and military used. At each of those spots, a new barrio would rise, with an innocent-sounding name: Medellín without slums. New settlement area, social housing program. Along with concrete and tin came another structure. Neighborhood committees, led by people Escobar trusted. Regular meetings. Not much paperwork, but perfect memory. Who lives where? Who is loyal to whom? Who has a son working for a rival cartel? Who has family in the police? An eyes and ears network that needed no technology. Just the women selling groceries, the men watching cars, the kids playing on the soccer court that Don Pablo paid to pave. Petition signature lists were prepared before the petitions even existed. When it was time to protest extradition, constitutional changes, anything that touched Escobar's name, vehicles would go up the hills, papers brought door to door. The same people once called to receive keys would be called again to sign. Each signature one more confirmation of who they owed and which side they stood on. The political advisor was tasked with dressing up the surface, making sure the press spoke of charity homes, social initiatives, self-made billionaire helping the poor. Gustavo was tasked with the underside, ensuring that if police or military wanted into one of the new barrios, they would have to weigh the image on TV. An armed officer facing an old woman holding her grandchild in front of her door. Escobar listened to it all, nodded, never mentioned the word votes again. In his mind, running for office had become only a side prize. They thought he built houses to win seats. He needed seats, but what he wanted more was walls of people. The young politicians in Bogota would look at the new barrios and think they were PR campaigns. They would smirk about the mountain Robin Hood. They would count potential votes, calculate alliances. None of them understood it as simply as the sentence Pablo said that day, after everyone else had left, only he and Gustavo remaining in the room, whiskey glasses empty. "They think houses are bricks," he shrugged. "I know houses mean this. When they come, they have to go through you first." The garbage dump lay on the edge of the city, like an ever-open mouth, spewing smoke and stench into the sky. By day, Garbage trucks lined up one after another, climbing the slope, dumping all of Medellín into a single pit. By night, fires smoldered, thin white smoke rising and mixing with the mist. Andrés's house sat right on the edge of it. If you could call it a house, 4 planks stood upright, a few bent corrugated tin sheets tied with wire, a dirt floor packed down to reduce the mud. Every time it rained, water mixed with leachate from the garbage flooded in, turning Miguel's sleeping spot into a cold mud puddle. The boy curled up on a torn foam mattress, feet touching the damp ground, falling asleep to the soundtrack of his mother's coughing. Lucia coughed from morning till night, dry coughs, then phlegmy ones, then coughs so bad she couldn't stand straight. A doctor at the clinic once said something Andrés never forgot. She doesn't need medicine, she needs different air. Different air where, when everything they had was garbage, smoke, dust, and a shack thinner than a raincoat. Andrés worked as a construction helper down in the valley. Every morning he left the dump while it was still dark, sliding down the dirt steps, catching the boss's truck, sitting in the bed with 24 other men, knees touching knees. They built buildings they would never live in. One day the boss got a new contract, an office tower downtown, more glass than walls, security guards in new uniforms, ties knotted, standing straight like soldiers. Andrés's best friend, Luis, got hired as a guard there. The two drank cheap liquor in a small bar, laughing because for the first time Luis had a job cleaner than scavenging in the dump. "I'll be guarding the big shots," Luis said, chest puffed out under the white shirt his wife had just ironed. "My kids will call me security guard instead of garbage picker now." The morning of the explosion, Andrés was plastering cement on the 3rd floor of the site next door. The boom hit like a slap. Not the sound of falling bricks, not a truck collision. A thick, deep blast that made the whole concrete floor shake. The glass windows of the building across the street shattered in the same instant. Men on the scaffolding hugged the poles. Men on the ground fell flat. Smoke rose so fast it blocked the sun. Someone yelled bomb. Someone reflexively said Pablo's name, the way people say the Lord's name when lightning strikes. Andrés dropped his trowel and ran down. A crowd had already gathered: soldiers, police, firefighters, reporters, onlookers. He tried to push through the cordon, shouting Luis's name. No one answered. By the end of the day, he hadn't found his friend. He only received a black plastic bag from a police officer. Inside a charred white shirt, an old belt, security shoes burned half away. He carried that bag home, hands shaking, feet barely touching the ground. Lucia opened the bag, looked at the blackened fabric, touched it lightly as if touching dead skin. Miguel looked at his father, at the bag, eyes wide. What used to be only on TV now lay on their floor. Between 2 broken plastic chairs, the drug war was no longer blurry images on the news. Death counts read quickly to make room for commercials. It was the smell of burned cloth, the voice of a best friend who would never answer again, the boy asking, "Where's Louis, Dad?" with no answer clean enough to say in front of a child. A few weeks later, a man in a shirt and clean shoes, holding a clipboard, climbed the slope to the dump area. Not police, not city worker. He called out names from a list. When he reached Andrés Ramirez, he looked up, scanned around. Andrés stepped forward, hands still dusted with cement. Lucia behind him, hand over her mouth from a cough. "Your family has been selected," the man said. "Housing program, new settlement, on the hill. Brick houses, good tin roofs, clean water. Free." Andrés thought he'd misheard. Free was a word used in radio ads for appliances, not for houses. "Are you sure it's the right name?" Lucia asked, voice hoarse. The man pointed to the line on the paper. "Correct name. Correct ID number. No mistake." Luis's name was there too, crossed out with a ballpoint pen line. Miguel watched from behind, not fully understanding, only seeing his mother's face suddenly brighten like before the coughing started, seeing his father swallow hard over and over, as if trying to push something down a throat too narrow. That night, After the garbage trucks had stopped running, when the dump only had the low rumble of fires, Andres and Lucia sat in front of the shack, the plastic bag with Luis's burned clothes placed between them. They whispered about the new neighborhood, about no longer catching rainwater in buckets, about Miguel sleeping on a dry floor. Joy mixed with fear. "Why us?" Lucia asked. "Is it because Luis died? Because you worked on that site?" Andres didn't know. He only knew there was a line struck through his friend's name on the list, and a check mark next to his own. On the day they received the house, trucks parked at the foot of the new settlement. No garbage smell anymore, only the smell of brick dust, fresh paint, and trampled grass. Rows of brick houses lined the hillside, tin roofs perfectly straight, wooden doors unscratched. People carried plastic chairs, old pots, thin pillows from the trucks into rooms they had only seen in movies. Miguel ran ahead, opening every door, shouting when he saw a real toilet, a real faucet. Lucia stood in the middle of the room, coughed once, then stopped, listening to her own echo bounce off 4 solid walls. Andres stepped onto the porch, unable to believe he was standing on tiled floor, looking down at the dump where his old shack was now just a colored speck in a sea of plastic and smoke. The crowd gathered in front of a house in the middle. Local TV cameras set up on tripods, cables running to a generator chugging away. Escobar's men stood on both sides, shirts tucked in, keeping order. When the white Jeep stopped, whispers spread through the crowd like wind. Don Pablo. Pablo stepped down. Light-colored shirt, dark pants, polished leather shoes, walking without hurry. He shook hands with a few people along the way, patted children's heads, paused a beat longer in front of an old woman stammering thanks and forgetting her own Spanish. The station host said a few words into the microphone, voice tight with excitement. Then it was Andres's turn. One of the men called his name, gently pushed him forward. The camera focused, microphone extended. Pablo looked at the paper in his subordinate's hand, then at Andres, as if connecting two pieces of information. "You were Luis's friend?" he asked quietly, out of microphone range. Andres nodded, eyes suddenly stinging. Pablo handed him a shiny key, cold in his palm. "No one can give you back the friend you lost," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, but without needing the speaker. "But at least your son won't die from garbage smoke." Those words cut through Andres like a knife. Right at the deepest pain, the exact words he'd heard from the doctor with no way to answer. Tears spilled, partly from grief, partly from relief. For the first time, he felt someone with power, money, guns, looked straight at his life and named it. Not as an item on a report, but as a human being. He clutched the key, said gracias so many times the word lost meaning, becoming only broken sounds. The camera captured it. That night on TV, all of Medellín saw the man from the dump clutching his chest, crying as he received a house from the hands of the man the press called a monster. The anchor told the story in the usual mold. Drug lord turned philanthropist. Viewers nodded, changed the channel when the movie started. Outside the frame, the money that built those houses still flowed from the same source. The white shipments, the cash-filled suitcases, the extortion, the bombings like the one that took Luis's life. Pablo blew apart one part of the city with explosives, then used the money from that to rebuild another part with bricks, tin roofs, and promises. The people standing on the new bricks had to thank the man who ordered the explosion that kept their friend from ever coming home again. After the ceremony, when the cameras were folded up, when the white Jeep had left the slope, Escobar's men went house to house. No more smiles, no more warm eyes for the camera. Their voices low, even, stating the obvious. "When Don Pablo needs everyone to come downtown for a protest, remember to go," one said to Andres. "No one's forcing you. But you know who built this house. If the police come asking, best to say you don't know anything, just that he gave the house. Everything else isn't your business." Andres nodded. It sounded perfectly reasonable. Leave the dump, get a house, in exchange for a few trips downtown, a few times keeping quiet. He held the key in his hand, fingers running over the metal teeth. That night, he hung the plastic bag with Luis's burned clothes on a nail in the new wall, next to the door. The black burn marks on the fabric faced the shiny key on its hook. He looked at both, heart mixed with gratitude and loss, not seeing the thread connecting them. He didn't see that the money for this house traveled the same road as the bomb that killed his friend. He didn't realize he had just stepped into the exact position the man at the finca had drawn on the map. One link in a circle that began with an explosion and ended with shouts of Pablo when the armored vehicles stopped at the foot of the hill. A few months passed, and the garbage dump was now just a small gray smudge at the foot of the hill. The new barrio, named after the housing program, was always noisy. By day, the sound of children playing soccer on the concrete court echoed between the brick walls, the ball hitting the walls and bouncing back laughter. By night, yellow light from cheap bare bulbs shone out the doors, forming a glowing necklace around the city's neck. Brick houses, solid tin roofs, electricity, water, paradise for the poor, if viewed from afar. On every corner wall, posters of Pablo were layered over one another. Some showed him smiling, arm around a child, with rows of new houses in the background. Others had slogans scrawled in paint. Gracias, Don Pablo. Whenever the wind blew, the old papers flapped, briefly revealing the wall underneath, before a new poster quickly covered it again. Miguel's favorite spot was the soccer court at the end of the row. The patch of land that had once been rocky and uneven was now paved with cement, marked with white lines, 2 goals made from pipes. The older teens, in tight t-shirts and shiny chains, held the keys to the ball storage. They lent the kids hand-me-down jerseys from lower league teams, taught them drills, and taught them how to curse the referee. One of them, called El Mono because of his dyed blonde hair, took notice of Miguel. One afternoon after a game, El Mono called Miguel over and tossed a pair of nearly new sneakers at his feet. "Try them on," he said. "Stop playing barefoot on the cement. It looks pitiful." Miguel slipped them on, feeling like he had stepped into another world. Soft soles, white laces, toes still intact. He ran a few steps, stopped, grinned until he forgot to breathe. "Why give them to me?" he asked, still not believing it. El Mono shrugged. "You're fast. We need fast kids. The first job wasn't guns or drugs. It was standing at the alley entrance, pretending to play ball, pretending to kick cans, really watching the road. When a strange vehicle climbed the hill, Miguel whistled long. When he saw police green uniforms, he kicked the ball backward, spreading the word in seconds. He called it helping the neighborhood. El Mono called it work. In return, shoes. In return, a few folded bills slipped into his hand after each time the police turned back. Andrés saw every step clearly. He saw his son coming home later, saw him with small change to buy candy for his siblings, saw him hanging the sneakers high like a sacred picture. Every time he opened his mouth, the first words were always, "Don't get too deep with them." Every time Miguel replied, the first words were the same. "Without Don Pablo, we'd have died on the dump, Dad." That argument shut every door to debate, as if the brick house, tin roof, soccer court, clean water were a card Miguel held up in his father's face whenever questioned. One morning, the noise in the barrio was different from usual. Not ball sounds, not music leaking from radios. It was motorcycles revving hard, people shouting to close doors. Miguel was playing when El Mono yelled, "Policía!" The kids scattered like sparrows, vanishing into doorways, behind walls, under stairs. From the bottom of the slope, a convoy of olive-green jeeps climbed up, lights flashing. Search Bloc in front, local police behind. The unit commander that day was Captain Rojas. He wore no gold chains, no big rings, didn't smile for the subordinates of any kingpin. His file sat in a separate drawer in Bogotá, with a few notes. Not flexible, doesn't take envelopes, family once victims of gangs. In the force, men like Rojas were the minority. In Escobar's barrio, men like him were targets. The vehicles stopped at the roadside. Troops fanned out. Rojas raised the loudspeaker, read the order, trying to keep his voice calm. "We have a search warrant. We're only looking for one person. Everyone, stay inside your homes." Before he finished, a rock already struck his shield. Curses erupted from many mouths at once. "Get back downtown. Don't touch Don Pablo's people. You're only good at shooting the poor, not drunk men, women, holding babies, one hand on rocks, the other clutching house keys. Children behind them, eyes bright with excitement." Miguel hid behind his mother, shouting along, even if he didn't fully understand the heavy political words. Escobar's men blended into the crowd. No need to step forward, just tight lips and slight nods whenever someone cursed in the right direction. A young officer took a rock to the forehead, blood running down to the corner of his eye. The unit formed a shield line, tear gas scent lingering in the wind, but Rojas raised his hand to stop. Images of dragging women and children away from the barricade were something he didn't want on TV. The faces he saw in front of him weren't hardened criminals. They were people caught between a man with too much money and a state that arrived too late. "Withdraw," he said through clenched teeth. The vehicles began backing down. The jeering grew louder. Rocks flew after them like a send-off. When the road dust settled, the barrio returned to normal with frightening speed. The court filled again. The corner store reopened. The Pablo posters on the walls seemed to smile wider. That night, Rojas didn't return to the unit. He came back alone, in civilian clothes, cap off, gun left in the trunk. He parked a distance away, walked up, hands in pockets, eyes scanning like a lost stranger. He knocked on the door of the house with the black plastic bag hanging beside it, a detail he remembered from the morning chaos. Lucia cracked the door, coughed once, eyed the stranger. "I'm police," Rojas said quietly. "Not like the ones this morning. I need to talk to your husband." Andrés stepped out, shoulders tense, eyes wary. Life on the dump had taught him one thing: police arriving always meant bad news. Rojas raised both hands to chest level, palms out, as if someone were aiming at him. "I'm not here to arrest you," he said. "If I wanted that, I'd have brought the whole team." They sat on the front step. Lucia went inside, leaving the two men with her cough echoing from the next room. The yellow bulb on the porch cast dim light on their faces. Rojas looked around, saw the Pablo poster on the opposite wall, Gracias painted in red. "Nice," he said. "Solid brick walls, roof that doesn't leak. Your son has a dry place to sleep." Andrés didn't reply. He was grateful for this house to the point of pain, but hearing praise from a police officer's mouth made him feel inspected. "Who do you owe?" Rojas asked. "No beating around the bush. Don Pablo," Andrés answered, almost reflexively. "Without him, we'd have died on the dump." Rojas nodded. "You're half right. You owe him half. Who do you owe the other half to?" Andrés frowned. "Your son," Rojas continued. "He didn't ask to be born on a garbage dump. He didn't ask to be born in a drug lord's barrio. He just wants to play soccer, go to school, come home without hearing gunfire." Silence thickened between them. From the court came Miguel's laughter. El Mono shouted something. The kids shouted back. The happy sounds felt like background music for something else quietly shifting. "They've already given your son shoes, money, a sense of belonging," Rojas said. "They'll give him more, until the day he stands in the road with a gun in his hand. Then, if I have to give the order to shoot, my bullet won't ask who gave this house." Andrés clenched his fists on his knees. The image of Luis somewhere under burned concrete, the charred shirt, mixed with Miguel in new sneakers running on the court, mixed with Pablo handing him the house key, all layered over one another under the yellow light. "What do you want?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Information," Rojas answered directly. "Not now. Not every time uniforms show up, when he uses this place as a shield, when he meets with his lieutenants, when his vehicle appears on the slope. I need to know in advance. I can't promise to catch him. I can only promise one thing. If I'm there, I'll do everything so your son doesn't die from my gun." The offer came with no envelope, no briefcase of cash, no paperwork, just a small slip of paper with a scrawled phone number, Rojas, written above it. Andrés looked at the digits, feeling like he was looking at a new kind of currency, unlike Don Pablo's money, unlike the crumpled bills Miguel brought home. "You say you don't owe Don Pablo?" Andrés tested. "I said you owe your son more," Rojas corrected. "This house is a gift, but if one day it becomes the excuse for someone to shoot up the hill, who do you think you should stand with?" Miguel ran up, face flushed, sweat sticking hair to his forehead. He gave a quick greeting, eyed Rojas, without much friendliness. Police all looked the same to him, then slipped inside, bragging to his mother about the last goal. Rojas stood. "I don't need an answer tonight," he said. "I won't come back with the team unless someone calls me." He placed the paper in Andrés's hand. "When you decide you owe your son more than you owe your boss, call." His footsteps faded down the slope. Andrés stood on the porch, the soft paper in his hand, sweat blurring the ink slightly. He didn't tear it, didn't burn it, didn't show his wife. He folded it in half, then quarters, tucked it deep in his pocket next to the crumpled bills Miguel brought home from the court. That night, while Lucia slept and Miguel hugged his sneakers to his chest, Andrés lay on the bed, eyes open, staring at the new ceiling, listening to wind rattle the tin roof. On one side, the brick house, the neighborhood shouting Don Pablo's name, the gracias he had said in front of the cameras. On the other, the vague fear of seeing his son become a blurry figure in a news report like Luis. In the darkness, the first seed of the thought of betrayal began to sprout, not loud, not dramatic, just a heavy feeling in his chest. In Harlem, 5 Italian families bought Big Sam with $50,000 placed on the table. In Medellín, an officer named Rojas tried to buy a father back from Escobar with a whispered promise at the doorstep. "If the day comes when guns have to fire, I won't let my bullet go through your son's chest." The day Miguel almost died had no bombs, no cameras, no speeches, just an afternoon like any other on the hill. The soccer court, shouts, the slap of sneakers on cement. A goal that sent the pack of kids piling into a group hug. Down the slope, a pickup truck with no plates pulled up. 3 armed men got out, T-shirts, jeans, heavy chains. Sicarios from a small gang daring to operate on Don Pablo's turf without permission. At the other end of the slope, local police vehicles appeared almost at the same moment, lights flashing, sirens wailing. One side, guns without uniforms. The other side, guns with badges. The soccer court lay in between. El Mano let out a curse and shoved the kids to scatter. Miguel turned just in time to see the first muzzle flash. The bullet slammed into the wall behind him, spraying brick dust. A section of Pablo's poster peeled off, revealing the old wall underneath. Another bullet grazed past his ear, its whistle cutting through every other sound. Someone yanked him down hard. His whole body hit the cement, head knocking into another boy's heel. In the seconds that followed, everything was chaos. Gunfire, shattering glass, people screaming, mothers calling children. When the gunsmoke cleared, the sicarios were gone. The police vehicles had backed down the slope, leaving 2 small blood trails on the court. Miguel lay in his bed at home that night, hands clutching his head, mouth repeating, "I'm fine," over and over, eyes wide and unblinking. The bullet hadn't touched him. Its whistle still lived in his ears. Andrés sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his son's new sneakers stained with someone else's blood, unable to tell whose. When Lucia finally fell asleep from exhaustion, he stepped out onto the porch, pulled from his pocket the paper now creased to the point of frayed edges. Rojas's phone number, the ink slightly blurred, but every digit still clear. He stood there a long time, as if with just a little more time the call would lose its reason on its own. Then he dialed. The other end rang twice. "Hello, it's me," Andrés said, voice dry. "Who's this?" "The one with the black plastic bag on the wall," he said, like a password. Rojas understood immediately. What happened? My son almost got shot today, Andrés said. Not because he did anything. Because they use this place as a shooting range. He swallowed. Looked up the slope where darkness hid the court. You want him. There might be a chance, but don't shoot up the hill. No preamble. No bargaining. The words were the bridge between the fear of losing his child and the name the whole city wanted in cuffs. On the other end, Rojas was silent for a few seconds, paper rustling, pen tapping the desk. Tell me what you know, he finally said. Andrés shared fragments. Rumors of an upcoming meeting with the neighborhood leaders. A lieutenant's vehicle that had once brought Pablo up this hill. The way the subordinates cleaned the court too thoroughly on certain days. No exact dates or times, but patterns. Rojas listened, wrote, asked for a few details, didn't push for more. Before hanging up, he said, "If we move, we won't shoot up the hill if I'm still in command. But you have to understand, when guns go off, I can't control everything. I just need to know you'll try," Andrés replied. Rojas walked into the unit's briefing room with something he'd never had before. An opening. On the table lay a map of Medellín, red dots marking safe houses, suspected locations, patrol routes. His superior, a colonel, was tired of hopeless reports. "We shoot, we kill one guy and 3 kids," he said. "We don't shoot, we let him laugh in our faces on TV." Rojas placed his note on the table. "If we catch him without civilian blood, we break the story he tells," he said. "Right now, he's a monster to Bogotá and Washington. On the hills, he's the saint who builds houses. We have to smash the second image." The colonel leaned back. "Plan? Surround the barrio when he comes to meet the neighborhood leaders," Rojas said. "No kicking doors, no shooting. Block the exits, use loudspeakers, use cameras. Let the whole world see he can't hide behind women and children anymore. He walks out, or he turns himself into a rat in front of the crowd he thinks is his." Someone gave a dry laugh. "You think he's stupid enough to walk into such an obvious trap?" Rojas didn't smile. "He thinks the whole hill belongs to him," he said slowly. "That makes people more confident than reality warrants." The colonel studied the map longer than usual. Finally, he nodded. "If we get confirmation, he'll be there. You're in command. But remember, no cowboy gunfire. One stray bullet ends all our careers." Rojas just nodded. He had been thinking about that since Andrés said, "Don't shoot up the hill." While the state forces drew up a clean plan, on the other side of the hill another plan was running. A kid in the barrio, not Miguel, a different one, saw Andrés making the call from the public phone at the bottom of the slope. He didn't hear the words, but saw the man turn his back, cover his mouth, lower his voice. The kid wasn't stupid. He had learned one thing. Anything involving police was worth telling someone. That night, he told his uncle, one of the guys watching the roads for El Mono. The uncle passed it on in a small room thick with cigarette smoke, in the middle of talk about this week's take. The information climbed slowly, mouth to mouth, vehicle to vehicle, to another table on another finca. The messenger didn't dare look his boss in the eye. "Seems someone in the barrio talked to police," he said. "Don't know who, but the kids say they saw someone calling from the public phone." Gustavo frowned. The top men around the table went quiet. From the beginning, they had known the day would come when someone in those new houses would try to trade gratitude for a different kind of safety. You don't build hundreds of homes for desperate people and expect 100% loyalty unto death. Pablo listened, didn't slam the table, didn't curse, didn't ask who. He let out a laugh, dry, joyless. "I've been waiting to see which of the people I gave houses to would try to sell me," he said, leaning back slightly. "At least they're not too stupid." Gustavo looked at him, waiting for the old-style order. "Find, grab, teach a lesson." Pablo shook his head. "No need to get that dirty," he said. "If they call the police up the hill, good. Let them see that even if they call, the hill is still mine." He tilted his head, as if seeing both chess games overlaid. "Let them believe there's a chance to catch me without shooting civilians. Let the gringos sit in front of their TVs thinking justice is coming. Then let everyone watch them stand in front of a wall of people and not dare move. A message went down. The meeting with the neighborhood leaders would still happen. Same day, same time. Let a few familiar vehicles appear. A few armed men along, enough for police informants to send the word up. As for Pablo, no one said what he would do at the last minute. Few knew, many guessed. The chosen night looked like every other night on the hill. Yellow porch lights, TV sounds leaking from windows, smells of cooking oil and soap. A little different. More men smoking outside doors, more shadows at alley entrances. Miguel overheard something about a meeting of the big guys. He only cared whether there would be soccer tomorrow. Andrés knew more. He heard the neighborhood leader mention it, voice a mix of pride and worry. He might come up tonight. He needed no name. Night fell. Down below, the search block assembled vehicles. Rojas walked the line of troops, repeating the order. No one fires unless I say. No one enters civilian homes. We're here to arrest one man, not fight the whole neighborhood. He adjusted his bulletproof vest, feeling the familiar weight on his shoulders. In his mind, the image he needed by the end of the night was one man in cuffs walking out of a brick house between two lines of police. No blood. Up on the hill, an unmarked jeep climbed first. People in the barrio saw the headlights, understood the signal. Some whispered, "It's him." Others just stayed silent, hands tightening on house keys like talismans. The vehicle stopped in front of the leader's house. Several lieutenants got out, checked around, then a shorter man with a slight belly got out last. Some swore it was Pablo. Others said it was just one of the lookalikes. In the darkness and yellow light, the silhouette was enough for the story to spread. The meeting took place inside, door closed. Outside, the barrio seemed to hold its breath. No one noticed that another man, wearing glasses and ordinary clothes, had left the finca early and was sitting in a safe house farther away, listening to reports over the radio. Word from spotters at the bottom reached the unit. A young officer ran in to tell Rojas. His vehicle showed up. Rojas nodded, gave the order. Move. The armored convoy surged up, headlights tearing through the night. Sirens. Loudspeakers on. The scene on the slope was the one that opened this story. The barrio residents had received the word earlier from the leader. If you want to keep your houses, stand in front tonight. No one said it that directly, but everyone understood. When the sound of armored engines grew close, they stepped out. Women holding children, men shoulder to shoulder, kids climbing low walls, eyes wide. Miguel stood in the middle, heart pounding, not knowing what game he was part of, only knowing every adult he had ever respected was standing here. Andrés came out last. Every step was a tug of war inside his head. He knew who had called Rojas. He knew who had pulled the crowd into the street. He joined the line not out of gratitude, not out of belief in Don Pablo, but because if he stepped aside, the whole barrio would know who had opened the door for the police. The armored vehicles stopped. Rojas stood on the platform, loudspeaker in hand. From his position, hundreds of faces looked up, eyes blinded by the lights. He didn't see Escobar. He saw people who owed for their houses. "We're only here for one man," he said, voice booming through the speaker. "We're not here to take your homes." A rock was thrown, clanging off a shield. Curses erupted from the crowd. "Don't touch Don Pablo's people. You only remember us when you want to shoot." The threat of violence hung in the air. Any finger slipping on a trigger could turn this slope into a staircase of blood. On the other side, another threat. If anyone backed down, if anyone went inside, if the human line thinned, tomorrow they would have to answer to someone. Not the police. The familiar lieutenants, El Mono, the ones who smiled on the court and looked at them differently when no one had their back. The barrio was pinned between two killers. One wore badges, the other wore gold crosses on their chests. Both sides believed they were right. Both were ready to spill other people's blood to prove it. Rojas scanned the crowd, searching for a face, a sign. He couldn't order a charge. He also couldn't turn back without swallowing the lump in his throat, realizing he had just been herded into the exact square on the other man's board. He recognized it when he caught the eyes of a few men deeper in the crowd, eyes not fearful, not angry, but as if watching a play they had rehearsed. He lowered the loudspeaker, turned to his subordinate. "Withdraw," he said. "Sir, we." "Withdraw," he repeated, voice no louder but heavier. "No order is worth more than the lives here tonight." The shield line backed up. The armored vehicles turned around. Headlights slowly left the faces on the slope, returning them to the sickly yellow glow of porch bulbs. The crowd stayed a moment longer, as if to make sure they had won tonight. Then, one by one, they went inside. Miguel exhaled, not realizing how long he had been holding his breath. Andrés stood a few seconds more, looking down at his feet. Seeing the dirt under his sandal soles was still the old dirt, only the feeling in his chest had changed. Relief that no one died, heaviness from understanding he had just helped set a new legend. On another hill, Pablo listened to the report over the radio, closed his eyes as if hearing a piece of music he had written himself. Police came. People stood in the way. Not a single shot fired. No one saw him. The only image left was armored vehicles turning back before a wall of poor people. Tomorrow, in the barrio, people would tell each other with pride. Tomorrow, in the papers, maybe a small column about tension between security forces and residents. In the minds of those sitting in Bogota and Washington, the Mountain Robin Hood story would grow another layer. The storyteller doesn't raise his voice when speaking of that night. The state didn't lose to Escobar on that slope, his voice calm. That night, Medellín lost to the very gift it had once cheered to receive. After the night the armored vehicles turned back, the barrio gained another layer of story. People retold it to each other in the corner store, on the soccer court, on front porches. "You see how they had to back down?" one guy said, slamming his beer can on the table. "Not because of the law, because of Don Pablo." That line got repeated, polished smooth of every detail. No one mentioned the fear when staring down gun barrels. No one mentioned the trembling hands clutching their children's shoulders. All that remained was the clean image. He made the police turn away. In the barrio's eyes, it was the only victory they had ever seen with their own eyes. At the other end of the city, the reports carried a different tone. Settlement X resisted security forces. One stiff line read, "Residents heavily influenced by Escobar." The next, on a map hanging on some office wall, the barrio was outlined in thick red marker, noted as hotbed of unrest. From that day on, any plan involving this hill came with two warning words. Sensitive, Escobar continued his war. Bombs exploded in Bogota, Cali, in bank high-rises, in front of political headquarters. Judges, journalists, presidential candidates, police officers were shot or blown up one after another, their names flashing quickly across the news. In Medellín, the blasts sometimes reached the barrio like distant thunder. Whenever security forces swept into other neighborhoods, Escobar's barrio remained a soundproof wall. When rumors said the Search Bloc would come up the hill, the neighborhood leader called a meeting. People were reminded again, stay still, don't open doors, don't answer. No need for loud slogans. Just do one thing together. Become the motionless backdrop for whatever power play unfolded between the state and their boss. Rojas continued his work in a world with little room for clean plans. The night the hill blocked the vehicles became a faint ink blot in the files. Transfer orders came. He was sent to another area, far from the dirt steps and the layered posters. He carried in his head the image of that slope, hundreds of faces, one man he didn't catch, and a sense of failure found in no report. Miguel grew up between two kinds of noise: soccer commentary from the radio and sporadic gunfire from other alleys. The sneakers El Mono gave him wore through the soles and were replaced by another pair, more expensive. Watching for police became helping the guys move stuff. Andrés gradually understood his son had crossed the line he had once tried to hold. no longer the boy whistling warnings. A small part of the flow of money and guns through the barrio. One evening, Miguel came home late, shirt with a small blood stain. "Someone else's blood," he said, voice too calm. Andrés didn't ask more. Every question now was double-edged. One day in December 1993, the war reached a scene many believed would never come. The TV in the corner store was turned up full volume. Helicopter footage from above. Red rooftops, soldiers running, a body face down, green shirt, blood soaking the slight belly. The reporter repeated, "Pablo Escobar Gaviria is dead." In the barrio, some fired guns into the air in celebration. Bullets falling somewhere no one counted. Some buried their faces and cried as if losing family. Posters on the walls suddenly became memorial portraits. On the soccer court, the young men argued. "They got him. Now who protects us?" one asked. "He said he'd never let the gringos take him alive." Another answered. "He was right. He died here." Andrés sat in front of the TV at home, Lucia behind him, hand on his shoulder. His eyes stayed on the screen but didn't focus on the body. He looked at the surrounding rooftops, the brick houses like his own, the porches like his, all lying under the shadow of a story that had reached its end. He felt no relief, nor the grief of those crying outside. The closest feeling was a sudden drop, as if the debt he had carried since the day he received the key was still there, but the creditor had vanished. Owing a dead man is a strange feeling. No one left to say thank you to. No one left to say paid in full. A few years later, the war changed faces. Escobar's death didn't stop the shooting. The power vacuum was filled by other gangs fighting over streets, over routes. The barrio was no longer Don Pablo's, but his name still clung to every brick. El Mono picked the wrong side in a territory reshuffle, and one night didn't come home. Miguel slid along those fading trails. Running goods became going with this guy to shoot that guy. One time he was caught in a raid, shoved into a van with others, all saying the same thing at the station. They just asked us to carry stuff. That time Rojas wasn't there to mention your son. A stranger prosecutor read the file, signed papers, sent Miguel to a detention center far dirtier than the old court. He went in, went out of the records, then disappeared in a fight no one outside cared about. Andrés heard through acquaintances. No body, no funeral, just the words "he's not coming out anymore," and a long silence. He went home, sat on the porch, looked inside. The brick house had done exactly what the doctor once said, saved his wife from garbage smoke, saved his son from damp dirt floors. It hadn't saved Miguel from gun smoke. The city changed colors. The metro was built, gliding past old alleys. Neighborhoods once known only by word of mouth started appearing in tourist brochures. Foreigners came to Medellín, heard guides talk about the reborn city, about from violence to creativity. One day, a tourist bus stopped at the foot of the barrio. The guide, microphone in hand, pointed up at walls covered in graffiti. Pablo's face spray-painted again, beard sharper, eyes gazing far. Below the mural, Hero del Pueblo, hero of the people. In another corner, a different mural showed a dove taking flight from a gun barrel. Beside it, the logo of an NGO that funded the paint and brushes. A young politician, sleeves rolled up, clean sneakers, came to the barrio handing out gifts during election season. He posed for photos with kids on the soccer court, standing in front of the Escobar wall, hand raised in a peace sign. Days later, the picture appeared on social media with the caption, "Standing with the poor, building a new future for Medellín." No one mentioned that the wall behind him was paid for with the same kind of money that once blew up buildings. The state began talking a lot about healing the wounds of the past. Community projects, art classes, history tours were organized. Guides told Pablo's story like a movie character, both brutal and generous. They stood in front of the brick houses Escobar had funded and told visitors. Back then, this was a symbol of drug power. Today, it's a symbol of community strength. The new politicians needed votes. They needed photos standing in the barrio, arm around the poor, promising it would never happen again. They walked into the very network Escobar had built. Neighborhood committees, leaders, the people who kept lists of names, phones, apartment numbers. They only replaced the posters on the walls with new faces and party logos. The structure underneath barely changed. A small group deciding who the whole area would listen to, applaud, protest for, stay silent when someone was arrested. Andrés grew old in his house, hair gray, back slowly bending. The black plastic bag with Luis's burned clothes still hung by the door, next to an old photo of Miguel on the court, feet in the sneakers El Mono gave him, smiling wide, knowing nothing yet. Whenever he heard tourists laughing in the alley, he didn't go out to look. Whenever the neighborhood loudspeaker played some official talking about Pablo as a history lesson, he turned off the radio. The house still kept out the rain, still kept them warm. It remained living proof of a parallel truth. It had saved his wife from garbage smoke while pulling his whole family into the orbit of a war they never chose. Downtown, in a clean conference hall, they held seminars titled "Learning from the Past to Avoid Repeating Mistakes." Slides projected black and white images of bombs, bodies, trials. No slide showed Don Pablo handing house keys to a crying man on television. No slide showed a slope full of poor people standing in front of armored vehicles. The storyteller looks up from the written words and says straight what the invitation didn't print. Pablo died, but the debt didn't die. It only changed collectors, from the hands of a man who handed out keys to buy silence. It passed to the hands of those standing on stages, promising it would never happen again, while still leading tours for photos in front of walls bearing his name, still entering the barrios he built to ask for votes, still relying on the grateful hills to call themselves the representatives of the new Medellín. Now, if you stand at the foot of the hill and look up, the Pablo Escobar barrio is still there. The brick houses have aged, the tin roofs have rusted, but the lines of the story haven't faded. Small tourist vans climb the slope slowly. Doors open. American and European tourists step out, eyes lighting up as if walking onto a movie set. They raise their phones, snap photos of the graffiti of Pablo's face on the walls, the familiar mustache, the sideways glance, then turn for selfies with the standard tourist smile. Some residents live off it. They sell t-shirts printed with Escobar's image, mugs, hats, real deal tours. They retell stories polished for easy swallowing, adding a bit of humor, removing a bit of blood. They lead visitors to the prettiest wall, the viewpoint that shows the whole valley, the spot with the best light for photos that look truly Medellín on Instagram. Others hate all of it. They hate the name stuck to their neighborhood like a product label. Hate that every time they give their address, it has to come with the name of a man who cost them loved ones. But they can't escape it. Electricity and water bills still list the barrio by that name. Buses still stop at stations with that name on the electronic sign. Tours still sell tickets with the 3 words Pablo Escobar. In a small shop next to the soccer court, an old woman sits with her back against the wall, fingers running over rosary beads. She has lived long enough to remember the smell of the garbage dump, to remember her own cough before she had a real tin roof. When the guide asks what she thinks of Escobar, she doesn't hesitate. Without him, we would have died on the dump. The answer is simple, clean. Like the old line, the state only shows up after the house burns down. It doesn't forgive the bombs. It only acknowledges one truth. Someone showed up before the leaking roof stopped leaking. Outside on the court, another man leans against the goalpost, watching tourists take pictures, his voice dropping low when Pablo's name comes up. Without him, he says, eyes not leaving his son playing ball, my brother wouldn't have died in the downtown explosion. 2 statements, 2 edges of the same blade, one side gratitude, one side blood debt. In between stand the houses, unmoved, brick walls silent, choosing no side. In Harlem, a man named Bumpy Johnson used an unloaded gun to teach the entire Italian Mafia a lesson. Real loyalty can't be bought with money, can't be bought with contracts, can't be bought with bounties on someone else's head. He let the traitor pull the trigger, let the whole room hear the empty click, then showed him that true power comes from always being 3 steps ahead of your opponent, not from the number of bullets in the magazine. In Medellín, Pablo Escobar didn't need a broken gun. He used thousands of real built houses. He proved the opposite. Loyalty can be bought. You can take the most forgotten people, pull them out of the garbage dump, give them walls, roofs, water, then ask them to stand between you and anyone coming for justice. But that loyalty isn't like the kind in ethics books. It's more like a loan never fully repaid. Interest compounds with every silence, every time blocking the road, every time saying, "I don't know anything. I only know he gave the house." The ones who pay are never the gift giver. The ones who pay are Andrés, Lucia, Miguel, the sons who died in detention centers, died on the streets, died in shootouts the papers call settling scores. The ones who pay are an entire city forced to carry a drug trafficker's name in every discussion of its own past. The debt collector changes over time. Yesterday, it was Don Pablo, handing keys with his left hand and orders with his right. Today, it's the young politician standing in front of walls painted with his face, promising this will never happen again while still using that very hill as the backdrop for photos standing with the poor. Tomorrow, it might be the new tour companies using this story to sell more tickets. In the drug war, most people only see 3 things: cocaine, guns, car bombs. Cocaine is the reason. Guns are the tool. Car bombs are the message. Everyone points to those when trying to explain why a country was torn apart by violence. But what kept Pablo Escobar alive so long wasn't the white shipments or the explosives. Explosives only brought more troops, more laws, more cameras. Shipments only put his name higher on the news. What prolonged his game through generations of politicians, through every new Search Bloc commander, through every new crop of kids growing up on the hills, was the house keys he tossed out like candy. Each key came with an unwritten clause. When they ask, you know nothing. A whole hillside full of people keeping secrets for him, not because they loved him, but because they loved the roof over their heads. That was the weapon no army had. And that's why, the night the armored vehicles stopped at the foot of the barrio, the ones who had to turn back weren't him, but the ones holding the arrest warrant. There's one question that won't go away. If you were Andrés, standing on the garbage dump, holding your child in the stinking smoke, hearing the doctor say your wife needs different air, watching Louis walk out the door never to return, then a man holds out a key to a brick house and says, "Your son won't die from garbage smoke anymore. Would you refuse that key?" The easiest answer is, I would do different. The harder answer is to look around your own neighborhood. Look at the gifts that come with conditions. Look at the promises that come with silence, and ask, are the keys hanging on my own wall truly free? If this story makes you see differently the kindness of powerful people, the gifts too big to be random, please subscribe. On this channel, we'll keep peeling back the layers of stories where gifts always come with a bill. Only the bill is sent late. And if you think Pablo only used houses to bend the rules, wait until you hear how he used cash, coffins, and an entire prison he designed himself, La Catedral, to make a whole country rewrite the rules of the game. Don't miss it. If the story of Escobar's gifts makes you rethink the real price of gratitude, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next hidden corners of power. Thank you for watching to the end. See you in the next video, where we keep uncovering the hidden invoices behind the keys, the coffins, and La Catedral.